Hi, and welcome to Kell If I Know, where we talk about everything telecom and get to know the people who make wireless work. I'm Kelly Hill, your host, and this week we're going to be talking about UWB with Adam Smith of LitePoint. But first, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about one of my favorite news stories that's popped up recently. So there's a lot of telecom news. You can read all about it at rcrwireless.com. But this one caught my eye. This actually comes from another test and measurement company, EXFO. So there was a bit of a kerfuffle recently with a rival test company, Viavi Solutions. Viavi has, the backstory here is that Viavi has made two attempts separately within the last few months to acquire EXFO. And EXFO's founder, chairman of its board, and its largest shareholder, Jeremy Lamond, has basically said, no way, I won't consider that. And he recently made his own go private offer to EXFO, and the board has decided to move forward and put that in front of the shareholders, the minority shareholders, to decide whether the company will stay public or whether it will go private under Mr. Lamond's offer. But Viavi used his new offer, or his offer, as an opportunity to make yet a third offer, and they put out a press release about what a great combination it would be, how the two companies are so complementary, and everybody should think really hard about, rethinking Viavi's newest and latest offer. Mr. Lamond responded to this by putting out a very strongly worded press release. He put this out personally, not under the auspices of EXFO, saying things like, I want to provide absolute clarity for stakeholders. I would not consider any transaction with Viavi, including the most recent one, and basically that he won't consider any alternative change of control transaction for EXFO. It's either it stays a public company or it goes private under his offer. And he's the largest shareholder, so there's not a lot of wiggle room for the board here. By the way, the board put out its own statement a few days later, basically saying that it wouldn't move forward with looking at all at Viavi's offer, but it will present to minority shareholders Mr. Lamond's go private offer. So they'll be voting on that in the next few weeks to decide whether EXFO goes private or whether it stays a public company as it is. So yeah, interesting stuff. Now we're going to spend some time with Adam Smith of LitePoint, and we're going to learn a little bit more about Ultra WideBand. I am happy to introduce Adam Smith, who is Director of Marketing at LitePoint. Adam, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Kelly?
I'm doing good, Adam is my first guest, so Adam, I'm really glad to have you here, and we're going to be talking about UWB, or Ultra WideBand. So Adam, I want us to start off with some definitions, because there is a little bit of unfortunate overlap here, I think. So Verizon calls its 5G millimeter wave network UWB, or Ultra Wideband, and that is not what we're talking about here. UWB in this context is its own thing. So let's talk a little bit about what it is and what it's good for, and how long it's been around.
Sure. Yeah. So the Verizon UWB, the Ultra Wideband, it's a branding of their 5G service, if you will. It's not a technology. So the Verizon Ultra Wideband is based off of 5G, 3GPP technology. But the Ultra Wideband we're talking about today is the Ultra Wideband, the technology, and it hasn't really been branded per se, or at least nobody's picked up and run with any branding around Ultra Wideband. So when people refer to Ultra Wideband, the technology, they're typically talking about just plain old UWB, outside of what Verizon's talking about.
Okay. So it's a near field, close range technology. Let's talk about what spectrum it uses. Let's talk a little bit about what it is and what it's good for.
Yeah, it's I wouldn't call it near field technology. It's maybe a medium distance technology, maybe similar in the context that we're talking about. Maybe similar to Wi-Fi type of range. Okay. But technically speaking, UWB has been used for upwards of a century. In the old days, as a long distance way of transmitting. So you can send Morse code using UWB across long distances, but that's not really what we're talking about here. It's kind of gotten a little rebirth in the last couple of years as a positional technology. So not sending gigabits per second through the air. It's accurately determining position between two different devices.
Okay, all right. And so, but it's
it's in, I think, mid-band spectrum. It kind of has a range, right, that it operates in?
Yeah, so it actually, at least in the US here, it falls under Part 15 of the FCC. So technically, there's 3 different bands where it can go. There's like a 500 megahertz band, there's like a 3 gigahertz to 6 gigahertz band, and then there's like a 6 gigahertz to 10.5 gigahertz band. And most of what we see going on, so the UWB we're going to talk about today, typically there's 2 channels that we're seeing devices harmonize around. One is right in the middle of the 6 gigahertz band, like 6.5 gigahertz. And then one is upwards of roughly 8 gigahertz. So those are the 2 kind of main channels that are being used today for this fine ranging, if you will, is the application space we're talking about.
Okay. So fine rangings, and you mentioned, sort of positional information that it can provide. Can you give us kind of a rundown of how it compares to other technologies? You mentioned, it has a similar range to Wi-Fi. I still am kind of wondering how it compares to, how we see people using things like NFC or Bluetooth today in terms of capability and, how is it alike or different?
Yeah, so what's one of the things that UWB is bringing to the table that's unique compared to some of the other wireless technologies. So if we look at different wireless technologies, many of them provide positional capability. I mean, one of the first things that we had for doing indoor positioning was Wi-Fi triangulation. So you turn on your phone, it says turn the Wi-Fi on for better positional accuracy. So it's using the Wi-Fi to kind of, different access points, triangulate where your signal's coming from. More recently, Bluetooth has introduced the capability of doing ranging, doing distance and direction as well. What's unique about Ultra Wideband is that it's not using the signal strength, which is how some of the other technologies use for determining where your position is. It's actually using a concept called time of flight. So one device is sending out a signal, another device receives and returns that signal, and the time it takes on a round trip, divide that in half, and then the distance, because the speed of light is how fast these signals travel. So it's using an idea of time of flight rather than signal strength. Because signal strength, I can definitely calibrate a radio to say I'm 2 meters away, I'm 10 meters away. But what's unique about time of flight is it's a much more secure way of determining position. And that's really what the niche that UWB is finding in the market is really around applications that require higher security.
Okay. So how susceptible is it to interference? I mean, you mentioned it's going to operate under, or it operates under Part 15, and it sounds like security is one of its desirable aspects. How does it do in terms of interference?
It's pretty isolated from interference. I mean, under Part 15, as long as it behaves from a transmission point of view, it's not interfering with other technologies. Mm-hmm. Although there's some nervousness, if you will, around Wi-Fi in the 6 gigahertz band operating simultaneously with ultra wideband. But there are some pretty smart people tackling that problem right now. But from a receiver immunity point of view, you can't think about it in the same way you would think about Wi-Fi, for example, which is using a lot of subcarriers to modulate signals on there. This is really, it's a pulse technology. So it's a series of impulses to encode data in it. So it's not, we call it ultra wideband because it's kind of chicken and egg. A narrow pulse in the time domain basically is a ton of bandwidth in the frequency domain. And what it's really doing is that it's encoding data in these little pulses, and the artifact of that is it's taking up a lot of spectrum in the frequency domain.
Okay, so it's not, okay, so that's interesting because that compares to, I think of Wi-Fi and sort of the listen before talk behavior that is kind of ingrained in that technology. And so this is pulsed.
That's correct, yeah. It's a bunch of encoded pulses. So it's again, we're not putting gigabits per second through the air here. I mean, I think that the highest data rate tops out in the mid tens of megabits per second here. So it's not at all looking to be a replacement technology for the existing technologies we have on our phone. This is very much another radio we're adding to mobile products, to automotive space, home, home IoT type products, industrial products, things like that.
Okay, actually, it's interesting that you mentioned that. Okay, so the last couple of years, we have seen UWB announcements that it's making its way into smartphones. We had the iPhone in 2019, and then I believe also the Samsung Galaxy models that same year. What are you seeing in terms of device adoption? Obviously, when Apple and Samsung adopt something like that, that's enough to sort of make people sort of sit up and take notice.
Right, exactly, and Apple kind of did this a little bit. It felt almost clandestine. It was a surprise. Nobody was kind of expecting to see this technology in the phone, and I don't know. There just wasn't a lot of press around ultra wideband until Apple started making noise around it. But clearly, there's a couple of ecosystems that are adopting this technology. The smartphone has started now, and that'll be the majority of the volume we see shipping over the next short term here.
Okay.
But the automotive industry is very interested in this technology for the security reason. Our wireless key fobs today are basically, it determines distance with this signal strength methodology. And so somebody can, it's called a relay hack or relay attack, where they can capture and rebroadcast your key fob signal to steal your car. And ultra wideband is a much more secure way of doing that. And for an industry like the automotive industry, which is typically pretty slow moving at adopting new technology, this is about the fastest I've seen them adopt a technology. So there's, most of the automotive brands are looking at this. The Connected Car Consortium should be launching their digital key 3.0 spec later, maybe late summer. And so they're heavily moving along the track of looking at ultra wideband as a technology for the digital key.
So, okay, so I have to say that as I was doing research for this, I ran across some things from Volkswagen where they were talking about, yes, the more secure key fob, because you can more accurately detect the position of it. They also even talked about using UWB to be able to do things like detect a kid's car seat in the back seat and sort of alert the driver,
right.
Or things like being able to, open a back hatch with a specific gesture. But that was 2019, and obviously, as you mentioned, the automotive industry tends to move has to move kind of slowly in terms of adopting these things because they're working so far out in terms of product horizons. And that was 2019. So, and obviously, 2020 was a heck of a year. Did COVID interrupt the trajectory of what was going on with UWB? Is this stuff still just kind of emerging? What do you see happening now?
So I would say from a product development point of view, COVID did not slow things down per se. I think the current supply constraints that we're having right now, the automotive industry is having a hard time getting access to chips, and I have heard anecdotally that has slowed some of the adoption of ultra wideband. But in general, I would say, if anything, the development has marched ahead pretty quickly, again, because it's applications that require this higher security have been really driving the demand for developing these products. So I wouldn't say necessarily that COVID slowed down the integration of this.
Okay. So where would you say that we are in terms of its availability? You've got starting to emerge in smartphones. Automotive manufacturers, it sounds like, are really interested in integrating it into their vehicles. You mentioned that some of the chipset issues are affecting this. What do you? Are we sort of on our way to a tipping point? What do you think it would take to get there?
I think it's a little bit baby steps at this point. What we're seeing is that the smartphone companies, so right now there are two publicly announced phone companies that have adopted this technology. You should expect to see more of these phone companies adopting this technology maybe as early as the second half of this year. And we do expect this trend to continue. If I look at what the analysts are saying for ultra wideband adoption, the smartphone is going to lead the charge on that. So probably the next 12 to 18 months are going to be a lot of smartphones adopting it. And it's just like how we've found creative ways of using Bluetooth technology. The reason why we're doing that is because it's kind of ubiquitous in the mobile product. So if ultra wideband becomes ubiquitous in the smartphone, we'll see some creative use cases adopted. But right now, they're kind of like baby steps towards what an interesting application use case is. Where we sit today, it's kind of like the war of the tag, the wireless tag. So the keychains and the trackers and things like that are the first applications that have been paired to the smartphone. And then obviously, Apple made some noise last year about partnership with BMW to you have your iPhone 11 unlock your BMW. I think it's the BMW 9 model that they'll be coming out with later. So those are kind of the two leading applications. It's the automotive access and if you will, IoT type tracking type applications. But I could envision this growing into more sophisticated applications. I would love to see something in the AR, VR type of space, taking advantage of some of this positional accuracy. In the industrial space, there's a ton of opportunity. I think of this technology almost like you put nerve endings on the end of machines. And so you mentioned the car seat, you being able to detect where it is in the car. Imagine any machine in a factory knows where it is and where it is relative to a human, where it is relative to other machines. So it's like embedding little nerve endings in the end of any kind of device, whether it's a car seat or whether it's a automotive making robot.
Okay, awesome. So obviously your perspective on this comes from LitePoint. You guys are a test and measurement company, and you know, and you have UWB testers in your portfolio. Are there any sort of, I don't know, quirks or interesting aspects of this as a technology when it comes to the testing and integration of this technology into devices?
Yeah. In a way, it's a little evolutionary in the fact that over time, technologies have been getting wider bandwidth. We've been putting more information in the signals, and we've been taking advantage of different frequencies. What's a little unique about ultra wideband is this part 15 nature of it. So it's technically overlapping licensed spectrum, but you can use ultra wideband technology without a license as long as you operate under part 15 here in the US. And so what's a little exotic about it at this point compared to some of the other consumer technologies is the frequency range. So it generally covers 3 gigahertz up to about 10.5 gigahertz. And except for Wi-Fi 6E that's recently starting to get into higher volumes, we've been, in consumer technology, we've been kind of living in this sub 6 gigahertz space for a long time. And so from a test and measurement point of view, ultra wideband brings a couple challenges to it, one of which is the frequency range. So supporting upwards of 10.5 gigahertz, breaking the 6 gigahertz barrier, if you will. But the other thing too is that the current generation of ultra wideband is very wide. And so it's about roughly 500 megahertz wide channels, and we will be likely seeing these extending to over a gigahertz in spectrum as well. So extremely wide channels at least as we sit today, relatively high frequencies. So from a test equipment point of view, it's got, it's not totally foreign from test methodologies and measuring power and generating signals, but it is stretching the envelope of what consumer grade equipment that's been in factories and things like that. So there is a refresh of equipment from a development and manufacturing point of view that's required. But at the end of the day, other than a few unique measurements like this time of flight that ultra wideband brings, so for example, in Wi-Fi, we're very interested in the modulation purity. So there's a measurement that in the test and measurement group we call error vector magnitude, which is basically like, how accurately can I throw a dart at one point on the opposite side of a room and hit it? In ultra wideband, there's no equivalent. There's just, the modulation accuracy is not what's driving the edge of it. What's more important in ultra wideband is timing. So time of flight, and then more recently, angle of arrival. So basically, if you can determine how far something is away and what direction it's coming in, you can very accurately determine the position.
Okay. And when you say very accurately, is there like a ballpark? Are we talking, inches, centimeters, millimeters? I mean, some of because positioning data has been kind of a challenge to get really, really good.
Right. Yeah, so ultra wideband is technically capable of sub 10 centimeter type of accuracy. I've heard people talking about more accurate than that. Now, that being said, that means that you have to have a system that's been calibrated to do sub 10 centimeters. So that's one of the debates going on in the industry right now, is how accurate is good enough. If it's finding your keys in the couch cushions, you probably don't need half an inch accuracy. I mean, if I can kind of locate it to a cushion, I'm pretty sure I can find the keys. But for example, Bluetooth positioning can do 1 to 2 meter type of accuracy. So there's a big gap between an inch and 2 meters. So I think the use case is going to determine at the end of the day what kind of accuracy is needed for the application.
Okay. So So get out your crystal ball. You've given us a few kind of glimpses. What do you expect to see happening with ultra wideband this year, and then over the next, say, 3 years? You mentioned second half of this year we might see some things developing. And but it sounds like there's not necessarily, so, and we have automotive use cases that are developing, but probably not necessarily that quite yet.
So so let's talk about this year in particular. So I would not be surprised to see several other smartphone brands introduce products that have ultra wideband technology in them. And then additionally, so there's a consortium that we're a member of called the FIRA Consortium that's working on product interoperability. So their main focus is making sure that these products are interoperable, and we'll be launching a certification program shortly here. And so you'll see more and more products coming out to support that. And I think in the, let's just say in a 12-month time frame, it's going to be largely smartphone and accessory type, smartphone accessory type business or volume. So it's wearables, these tags, things like that. We have recently started seeing some networking companies, so home networking companies. So Plume, for example, just a month ago introduced a Wi-Fi mesh system that's incorporating ultra wideband. And so now we'll have indoor access points, gateways that will be able to determine where devices are in the room and provide different, the way I would describe it is contextually appropriate information to the user. So if the Wi-Fi system knows that you're in one room but not in the other rooms, maybe it can turn off and save power, or maybe it can do beam steering differently or something like that. But it's really around having machines and products understand where they are and be able to customize the experience, or customize the power consumption or whatever.
Okay. All right. Well, I have to say, if it can improve my indoor Wi-Fi experience, I might be interested. All right. Well, Adam, thanks so much for taking us through that and giving us that all the information on UWB. I'll be excited to see how it plays out and where we start seeing it crop up. Thanks so much.
Yeah, it's exciting to have new technologies to work with. We've been in kind of an evolution as we go through cellular technologies and we go through Wi-Fi technologies, and it's fun to actually have a totally different use case that a technology is looking to address. So it's been educational and fun.
Well, yeah. Well, and I think overall there's so much more interest. There's a lot of interest in positioning right now. Between the new FCC requirements about indoor positioning, you've got the cellular folks thinking a lot harder about how you figure out where somebody or something is indoors, and it seems like we've sort of, I think, you've seen a little bit more utilization of Wi-Fi for that. Obviously Bluetooth has come out with some capabilities. So there's, I think, a lot of interest in, how to use wireless to better figure out where things are and where they are in relation to other wireless things.
Right. And like I said, it's not, we're not seeing technologies necessarily replace other technologies other than generationally. We seem to be pack rats at technology. So we just kind of add, we keep finding a new use case, we add a new technology. And so in particular, our mobile products are getting to be pretty packed with little antennas in there now.
All right. Okay, awesome. Well, then, since I have you here, we are going to do a little bit of a game that I am calling Old Device Drawer. And so let's go ahead and I asked you to bring a couple of devices, old devices that you just have tucked away somewhere in the house, because we all do, or in a drawer somewhere. And I'm interested to see what you brought.
Yes, and so this might be the nerdiest thing I've ever done online, but I did find some devices. I was looking for some of my old favorite phones, because one of my favorite phones I ever had was a Motorola flip phone, and 2020 was a weird year, and my house flooded last year, And it was an opportunity for my wife and I to do a purge. So I purged most of my old stuff. But I did find some things deep in the drawer. So first thing, in its protective case, is the slide rule for Gen X.
Awesome.
So this is my HP 48G calculator that got me through university.
Nice.
This is the epitome of sexy, boxy, boring design. This is the granny panties of industrial design right here. And somebody at HP basically said, why do we want to focus on industrial design? We know every engineer on the planet is going to buy one of these things in the 1990s. This happens to have 32K of RAM with an oversized screen that enables up to 4 rows of reverse Polish stack manipulation. And if you wait about 5 minutes, it'll plot a sine wave for you.
Oh my God. I'm not even gonna, so dare I ask how old that is? Are you, can you, or do you?
I believe this one is from a, this is kind of an early mid 90s vintage, I think.
Early mid 90s, okay, circa early 90s, awesome.
Circa early 90s, yeah.
Yes, fantastic. All right, so what else have you got for us?
Okay, so next, got me super excited. I forgot I even had this. I have a PlayStation 2 in its original packaging.
Oh, you can totally sell
This
that.
was something, I know now, this session's gonna make me a little money here. This is a toy that got a young single guy living in the Silicon Valley through his mid-20s in the dot-com era.
Nice.
And saw a lot of Madden football. And then a game called Grand Theft Auto 3 came out, which changed my life. So.
Awesome. Do you still have the games? Have you touched this in years?
I haven't found the games. I haven't touched this yet. This has been in the closet forever.
Gaming systems.
Yeah, exactly. I guess what's interesting about this guy, this was the last console I owned that actually had a wired controller. So you had to sit no more than like 8 feet from the TV, or maybe you could extend that to like 12 feet if you pulled the console out from the TV and use the power cord as the extra distance as well. So it was amazing technology.
Lots of good memories there. Awesome. All right. So wait, do you have the flip phone? Because was it a Razor? If you say Motorola and flip phone, and I immediately go to, was it a Razor?
It was actually, it was after the first Razors were introduced, but at that time, I wasn't willing to pay the price point. I mean, at the time, the original Razor was selling what high-end smartphones sell for today. So it was kind of in between, like when Motorola came out with their $99 Razor, that's when I was in. So I had my $99 Razor. But no, I think this was a V55 something or other. But it was between the original Razor generation, and I could sit on the train and play Snake all day. And
early smartphone games, man. They had nothing on Candy Crush, but they were all we had.
Yes.
Okay.
And then the last toy I brought to bring here it's not as old a device, but this one has a little near and dear to me. So this is my iPhone 5 that I did find in a drawer. And this was at the time my favorite phone I'd ever owned. I mean, it looks so small now and it's got so much bezel. But this was the last phone I bought when carriers were still subsidizing handset purchases. And the only reason that I kept it is because as a child of the 80s, my very awesome nieces got me a cover of the Atom Bomb Garbage Pail Kids. So this is, I rocked this for like 2 or 3 years. And this one stayed in a drawer during the Great Flood. I didn't purchase this one.
Between the Cabbage Patch Kids and just the fact that it's such an old iPhone, that's a microcosm of so much history.
Exactly. Yeah. And actually, when I was digging through drawers to find old devices, I actually found a stack of Garbage Pail Kids cards that were in under the bed box.
So wait, do you have a favorite? Was it the nuclear bomb Garbage Pail Kid?
Atom Bomb. I mean, namesake.
Oh, okay, there you go.
It's card number 1. I mean, that's my favorite.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think I'm going to remember that forever about you, Adam. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been such great fun, and I hope that everybody who's watching, took a trip down memory lane with us on devices and learned something new about UWB.
So that wraps up today's episode. Thank you so much to Adam Smith of LitePoint for joining us, for telling us all about UWB, and for being such a good sport and taking us through his old device drawer. It's worth noting that since this interview was taped, LitePoint's IQ Gig UWB system was actually validated for UWB testing by the FIRA Consortium, or the Fine Ranging Consortium, which focuses on UWB development. So thanks again, Adam. Thank you all for joining me today, and I'll see you next time where we'll talk more about everything telecom on Kell if I Know.